we were bearish on the Trump policy agenda. Everyone couldn't believe it because, oh, he's the stock market president, et cetera. But it's the why. He was elected because of, to rebalance towards labor, away from capital. He feels, emboldened by the lower middle income class to, make things more fair. And all these, policies, it's not that they want stocks lower. It's a byproduct of, lower growth and higher inflation and reshoring, et cetera. And the same goes in the other direction, which is he rolled out the tariff policy. Many, people who like what he's doing say it was all part of the plan, and now he shifted the Overton window, and we're in this world where 10% is the minimum, and before, if you said 10% tariffs, people would have lost their shit. There's some truth to that. And then you have the other side that's like, oh, he's going to roll back completely, and there's going to be trade deals. But what that misses, and I think it's funny because in all these talks, you're seeing like China push back and kind of just have their arms folded. Japan's being stickier than people would like. Europe example as well. There's no deals yet, and everybody seems to be posturing less favorably. Yet the market continues to price in more and more hopes of trade deals happening. And there's this maybe it's complacency is the word. Maybe complacency is too strong, but this feeling that of people that I speak with that is like, oh, well, he's going to backpedal and reverse course. We're going to do trade deals, but that misses the whole point. It's like the whole reason to roll this out is to reshore, to bring jobs back, to lift up the middle class. Yes, unfortunately, it's very difficult to do that and rebalance the economy and send stocks higher. Like you'd love to do that, but it's hard. And redistributing wealth usually is never done in a way that makes everybody more wealthy. It has to come at the expense of someone else. So I think there could be some mistakes made later this year if you don't just truly understand why this is happening, and that this is not we botched a strategy, it was too boisterous of a rollout, we're going to walk back. It's like, no, we're plowing forward. We're managing the markets so we don't create a financial crisis on top of all these other things. But their policy agenda is not changing. It is absolutely hardened as ever.
I think it's somewhere in the middle where it's like, we fucked up a couple times in our execution, but the state of play remains the same. And I think a good reality check was actually right before we started recording here. Trump released his basically wish list of a fiscal bill, which I have here, which is really interesting. I think this is a pretty important reality check to see that, yes, where their focus on still remains the same. So if you just look at, base discretionary funding, they want to cut by 10%. So non-defense spending, they want to cut by 22%. That is still very much the Trump 2.0 playbook. They're not walking away from that. To the other side of that, they want to increase defense spending quite significantly, like 13.4%, which is obviously huge. But, it's still obviously the goal is that they want to be able to offset this with something else. It's not an outright increase. It's a different story whether this actually gets passed. This is just a wish list. But overall, when you look at on aggregate, that creates a net decrease of 7.6%. That is still where their head is at. We can debate the story of whether this is realistic or not. But in terms of just the folding on everything that has been the state of play of policy, it's clear that they're not fully relenting yet. It's just about meeting somewhere in the middle, and that middle is still quite significantly different from where we were in December.
Yeah, I think there's similarities here between people getting sucked into headlines and not really, and some people don't follow this stuff that closely, so they just follow headlines and no problems. But people are glued to tariffs as the only stock market negative thing going on in this administration. Like, economy and stock market are also two different things. And, everyone's now found relief in tariffs not being as bad, which we actually don't even know. When in reality, there's all these other things that are super growth negative going on. And in the same way, everyone has been glued to DOGE. And again, like when you lay this out, it sort of does paint the picture itself that this could be a decent strategy. If you're the Trump administration, who's, they know they're going to get a lot of flack in the media no matter what happens, this rollout kind of makes sense. I don't know if that's even true or not, and I don't pretend I have the answer, but everybody's glued to Doge. Elon this, Elon that, Doge this, Doge that. They're going to make the cuts. They're not going to make, it's this big thing. But what everybody's missing is that all of the talks behind the scenes in the traditional, normal, regular course budget reconciliation and financing plans are going to make the bigger impacts. Like Doge is a cut here, a cut there. New president, executive orders can come in, create new agencies, yada, yada, yada. They're not as lasting anyways. It's about efficiency. They literally say it's about efficiency. It's not about removal. The real thing to be nervous about is the actual normal course budget cuts, which is what you
Yeah.
just laid out. And so
And the
everybody's
Senate
saying
wants to go big on it. That's the issue. Is
exactly.
that
And they
so this? Yeah.
they have they have to move on this. It's their opportunity, and they have both House and Senate. You're exactly right. And it's like there's so many of these things where it's like the market and hysteria and headlines latch on to tariffs, and then there's like no immigration and reducing fiscal spending, negative growth more than tariffs are. And then in this case, it's like, oh, they're not going to do Doge. Well, the big thing is like they're distracting you with Doge. Meanwhile, they're doing like huge slashes in the normal course budget. So like people need to just like think on their feet a little bit.
Yeah, but the issue here, I think, is that that's what the core like executive branch and like Trump want to do, and I think there's holdups in terms of like the Senate bill that they're proposing is like a huge increase in fiscal deficits, and like this is the issue of trying to figure out like where do they want to get versus what's happening. And so you look at like where deficits as a percentage of GDP are, we're still in the same crazy fiscal dominance world that we're in of a 7% GDP deficit during a time that isn't recessionary. So you have to square out what do they want, which is what we just showed, which is like a 22% cut to no non-defense spending. But in the same vein, you also have the prioritizations of some of these instilled Senate members in Congress that want to keep doing what they always do, which is just keep on spending money, increase deficits, keep running a 7% of GDP fiscal deficit during like a non-recessionary, like that's a recessionary play, is to have a 7% of GDP deficit. So you have to figure out where does that all net out between like what they want, what these other parts want, and where does that actually lay. So it's hard.
I guess my point is just all I see nonstop, which is telling me it's way too consensus and almost like lazy. It's the most lazily regurgitated thing, is like nothing stops this train and it's just one way, which I believe in the end of the day, I do believe there's a government induced put on financial markets. And the question is, where is that put when it comes to either Fed or fiscal spending to stimulate and, reignite or prop up markets in the economy? But like all of this stuff is predicated on like, they can't do anything in April of the new administration. Like there's physically nothing that they could have done like to change what's already been enacted. We're rolling in February, March, all these monthly numbers. That is a predetermined budget, pre-Trump, all these things, pre this Congress and Senate. I mean, obviously a lot of overlap in members, but so you can't, I'm just like saying, like, to be intellectually honest, you can't say, well, Trump and Doge isn't work, their priorities aren't working. It's like, well, this isn't their budget yet. Let's see. I totally agree. I'm skeptic. I don't believe anything politicians say. So let's see. But it's not fair to evaluate the Trump admin's budget cuts on the last 3 months until they get this through, is my point.
Yeah,
And obviously
I
there's
think
the
that's
tax
fair.
cut thing too. There's the tax cut thing too, which I'm still scratching my head. It's like, want to cut, discretionary, increase defense, cut tax. Like, I don't know either necessarily how much they get done. So I'm not saying like they're going to do it. It's just like, it's not really, doesn't make sense to talk about these historical deficits because they don't align to anything that this admin has done.
Yeah. I think the takeaway is it's super fair to not, you can't fully judge this when they haven't even put their bill on the table yet.